Viewpoint is a news interview series presented in the belief that close journalistic scrutiny of civic officials is in the public interest. Tonight's program is Viewpoint Harvey Milk. For Channel 6, here's reporter Jerry Burns.
Welcome to Viewpoint. Our guest this evening is Harvey Milk, the supervisor from San Francisco's 5th District, which includes the Castro area, Noe Valley, and the Haight-Ashbury. Mr. Milk is in real life a camera store owner. Supervisor, one of the things you've been associated with lately is you were sponsor of the law which prohibits discrimination against gays in business and housing in San Francisco. Very briefly, can you describe the detail of that law?
The law would make it a offense, a crime, in essence, a civic crime. If you refuse to hire somebody, or you actually fired somebody you had employment because you found that the person was a gay person, or you refused to rent, or you refuse to allow public accommodations solely on those grounds.
And this applies to private
Right.
industry, private housing,
Hotels.
everything in San Francisco.
What it does in the city of San Francisco, in effect, brings the discrimination laws that exist on a statewide level against protection of blacks, or minorities, women, physical handicap, mental handicap, religion, national origin. It extends those coverages to gay people in the city of San Francisco.
What's the significance in a broader scope in terms of, is San Francisco now the first city in the country with such an
There are
ordinance?
other cities that have some versions of it, but nothing that has, that I know of at least, or we can find any, that has the penalties involved in case you are found guilty of such discrimination. And that puts teeth into the law and makes it more than a resolution type of thing.
Could a law like this have been adopted a year ago even in San Francisco?
Well,
Or 5 years ago, say?
less than a year ago, a similar ordinance was submitted to the Board of Supervisors and stayed in committee. So I think
So this time it passed 10 to 1. What happened?
well, a couple things.
Politically, what has changed
Harvey
in the
Milk.
city?
Yeah.
Well, that's modest enough.
I mean,
Is that it?
you know, it's always hard to say that, but I'm there. And, you know, like, I'm a supervisor. When the mayor was out of the state, I was acting mayor. In essence, I ran the city, you know, for 2 days. The next day, I could have gone to, example, the Macy's, applied for a job, and they could have refused to hire me solely because I was gay. I could have walked into the St. Francis Hotel. They could have refused to give me a room solely because I'm gay. It doesn't make sense. And so, in essence, Harvey Milk and what Harvey Milk stands for, I think, changed.
Well, there were 10 votes this time in favor of the ordinance.
Right.
Harvey Milk is 1 vote. What convinced the other 9? Is the gay voting strength in this town now that strong that the other 9 saw that this is something that enough voters want that they voted for?
I don't think it's strictly that. I think that's part of it. There's no question there are some people on the Board of Supervisors, and all politicians do count votes of the constituents. But I think it's a coming of age. It's a significance. It's an education process that has been taken for a long time. It's pressures coming to bear from church leaders, other legislators on different levels, business people saying, you know, it's time. And I think it was just a maturing of age as well, and maybe even more so than the voting bloc pressure.
Well, there were some objections. Supervisor Dan White voted against it. And some of the things he said, I think, ought to be raised and,
Sure.
and answered. He said, for example, his constituents were concerned, he said, that this would, for example, force private schools and parochial schools in the city to hire gay teachers.
No, it wouldn't.
When they wouldn't want to. Is that accurate? Was he wrong?
It doesn't force you to hire. It says that you can't discriminate on those grounds. And all we're saying basically is that if a person is qualified to teach, that's the only grounds you should hire or refuse to hire. The arguments that Supervisor White brought forth and his constituents are the same type of arguments that we heard generations ago about black people, before that about Jews, before that about Irish, and so forth. And history has proven that those arguments have basically come out of fear and myths. And once those minorities were accepted into the mainstream, they became assets. I think we can see the same thing. Also, I think Supervisor White did something that many legislators do. and that is follow the will of the constituents rather than show leadership. And that's why I think some of the other supervisors who equally had pressure by constituents not to vote for it, they chose the route of leadership rather than a popular vote.
Supervisor Feinstein, who did vote for it, along with all the other supervisors, apart from Supervisor White, said at the time that she felt convinced it was the right thing to do, but she expressed great concern. I don't know how exactly to put this, and maybe you don't either, that gays should exhibit some sort of self-control and standards. And I've noticed some letters in the newspapers from gays saying, you're absolutely right, and others saying, wait a minute, nobody else in this town has to toe the line. What she was talking about, I assume, was outrageous behavior in public.
Right. I found
and you smile, but didn't she have
offensive. She's offensive. Let me just say
she's offensive, or the behavior in public is offensive?
Both are. That statement is offensive. Richard Nixon sets the standards. The legislators who are on the take, the Watergate, the
well,
Mediagate,
Harvey, that's apples and oranges.
No, we're getting down to it. The mafia. Every single element, blacks, Jews, every group has criminals and myths. We do not judge those groups by the criminal element. We judge them by their leaders. But with the gay people, she's saying, you have to clean up the act for those. We have criminals. We have people who are offensive. There's myths. We should not judge just gay people by that. If we are, let's judge all Italians by the mafia. Let's judge all blacks and Asians and Spanish by the stereotypes and the myths. Let's judge all politicians by Richard Nixon. Let's judge all people who drink by the drunken driver. Let's judge all husbands by the 50% of husbands who beat their wives. You know, it's a double standard. And to just apply that standard to one group is offensive. And she was offensive on those remarks.
But you just said you think some of the behavior is offensive, too.
Right, but you don't judge a whole community by that. And you show me one group of people who have 100% great standards among their people. I mean, do we judge, did she say the same thing about the Asians because of the gang wars among the teenagers taking place? Is she judging the entire Asian community by that? No. Is she judging any group by the criminal element or the offensive element within the group? We have gay people who are offensive. We have gay criminals. But you don't judge a group by the bottom of the barrel. You judge it by the leaders. And for her to do that, I found was completely off base, was just grandstanding.
Does it concern you at all that that there is any kind of outrageous public behavior in the gay community?
It concerns me that there's outrageous public behavior in every community. But I understand some of that behavior too, you know, and I'm not excusing it.
But you know what her background, I hesitate to use the popular expression where she's coming from.
Right, that's the trouble.
You know that there are a lot of people out there who you know, drive or walk through Castro or Polk and say, oh my God, at least if these people are going to have, you know, homosexual relationships, let them do it in private and not in public.
Don't scare the horses. Okay, let's get down to that aspect. But first, let me touch on one thing. Diane seems to have trouble with anything that's not in its proper little neat place, and look into a whole record on pornography. And she once made a statement that the crime wave in the city is because of the dirty bookstores. And when I asked her how many of the thousands of automobiles stolen each year are a result of the dirty bookstores, you know, people stealing the car to get down there fast, she couldn't answer. She's great to make statements, but without any facts. But let's take a look at the Castro area, which seems to be the example we were talking about. Gay people, historically, and even today, really, are thrown out of the homes. Most families don't accept their child when they're gay. The church throws them out. The Most Holy Redeemer, a block and a half away from Castro, will not accept them in. The Lions Club, the social clubs don't accept them. The unions, basically, most of them don't accept them. There's no place to go. The gay bar becomes the family, the church, the social club. It becomes a meeting, gathering place because of nothing else. So naturally, they're going to come meet there. And so you're throwing them out of any place else, and so you're pushing them into the street and into the bar syndrome. And then you object to that. So I say the answer is for Diane not to object to that, but for Diane Feinstein to go to the Archbishop and say, open the doors of the church. To go to the rabbis, open the doors to the synagogue. To go to the social clubs, the yacht clubs, and everything else, the bohemian clubs, open the door to gay people. You see, you can't exclude them from every place and then say, then you can't do that.
Do you feel, you obviously feel that Harvey Milk in public office makes a difference, that you give credibility to the whole gay movement, certainly
No.
the great gay political movement? Well, you just
Right.
said
Wait.
the gay ordinance is the result of you being in office. I wonder whether you feel any responsibility. Do you feel constrained in your own personal lifestyle because of the responsibility heaped on your shoulders
Okay,
now?
that's first let me correct you. I'm not responsible for everything or a spokesperson for the whole movement. I represent a lot of people's views. A lot of gay people didn't vote for me, and a lot will next time. There's no way that anybody could represent a whole movement. I said the Harvey Milk and what he symbolizes, there's a big difference. I just happen to be the person. I do accept a lot of responsibility to a point where I don't go over 55. I don't even want a traffic ticket. I'm super careful. And I know that a lot of people, both bigots and young gay people, are looking at me for two different reasons. The young gay people for hope that I do a good job, and the bigots hoping I foul up so they can jump on me. So I'm quite careful. I'm not perfect. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. And I know it's going to happen sooner or later. But I do accept that responsibility. I knew it ahead of time. I knew what it was going to be like when you get a letter from a person in Southwest Africa asking for hope. When you get a phone call from a 17-year-old child in a small town in Minnesota who is handicapped and whose parents found out that he's gay and wanted to commit him to an asylum, and you become his lifeline, then you know you're going to do a good job. But that's not so awesome as it sounds. It's just something I knew would happen.
Well, let's bust out into another direction now. There is also Harvey Milk, the soon-to-be sponsor of an anti-speculators tax.
Right.
Tell me the detail. You intend to introduce next week,
Monday.
On Monday, an anti-speculators tax. Tell me the details. What will it be? 80% on the profit in the first year, 60% in the second year,
Right.
and then decreasing over how many years?
5.
Till 5 years.
Yeah. Let me just say, the reason we need it is more important than the specifics of the legislation. The fact is that there is no new housing, really new housing being built in the city, that the speculation and the second wave of speculation effects and the third wave are hitting the city now. And unless we do something now to prevent it from getting out of hand, we will drive out more poor people, more young people, more people who are just starting to make it economically, and certainly the senior citizens who are on fixed incomes will be driven out as less and less places become available for renting or the rents go too high. So there's a need for it desperately.
Will it discourage, though, people from improving their property?
No, because in it is built in that if you buy a house for $100,000 and you show $10,000 worth of improvement and you sell it for $120,000, the profit is not $20,000, it's the difference. There's a lot of loopholes to allow it. It is mainly to discourage as much as possible something. You see, the speculation of housing is not just a San Francisco problem. The higher you pay for your rent or your property taxes or your mortgage payments, the less disposable income you have, the less you have for ties, the less you have for vacations eating out. And San Francisco is a city that thrives on disposable income. It's a tourist city. And if people are spending all over the country too much money for housing, they're not going to be spending it for jackets, ties, glasses of water. And cities like San Francisco will be hit.
But isn't the price of housing really a mix of the demand and the supply? San Francisco has a very limited, you said yourself, a limited supply. No new housing is coming into the
That's
into
the
the
answer.
market.
There's the answer.
What's
the
the
answer?
answer?
We must encourage housing to be built in those areas of the city that are devastated now, the Western Addition and South of Market area. Not just complexes, but neighborhoods must be created that people move into it. And if we must give tax incentives, then so be it. We've got to do something to build new housing. Until you build new housing, this ordinance and anything else you may talk about is meaningless. It's not going to solve the problem, as you so well stated. You've got to have more supply.
But you're not afraid that this ordinance, if and when it passes, will have the same chilling effect on property in San Francisco that some say rent control has on property in New York, removing the incentive of a landlord, of a property owner, to do anything to upgrade his property?
This has nothing to do with the person who wants to build and build for an investment sake or build for their own use. It's strictly those people who are turning it over fast. This is almost the same type of legislation. The degree is different, naturally, but it's the same theory as was put on the stock market when they increased the margin requirements years ago. It took the speculative out of it because the market crashed and killed the economy because of the speculators. And we had to go in and stop the capitalist system. We had to put a control on it. the most capitalist aspect of the capitalist system was the stock market, and we put margin controls on it to do that. This is somewhat the same type of situation of putting a control on the speculative part of housing, and it's vital.
This I don't know that it puts controls. It obviously puts penalties. Some say
that's a control.
Some say that landlords, property owners, speculators would simply increase their prices even more, assuming they could get them, to absorb the cost to them of the fact that 80% or 60% is going to be taxed, 80 or 60% of their profits.
I doubt very much if they'll be able to sell it at those prices. People are not going to be able to do, you know, there is a limit of supply and demand where you're just not going to pay for it. You know?
To what extent, in your mind, have speculators, and there ought to be a different word, it has such an awful connotation, but anyway, been responsible...
There's one under your day. There's a speculator under your bed.
Oh my God, hit him with a shovel. Have speculators really contributed at all to the city in terms of upgrading, say, the Castro area, the Haight area, the lower Pacific Heights area?
Not the speculator, the person who renovates a building, the person who's into
how do you distinguish?
How soon and how fast you turn it over. A person who buys a building and within 1 year, with no intent of living on it, not even fixing it up, maybe a coat of paint, and turns it over, or the building's turned over 2 or 3 times in 2 years, or there's paper transactions with not even cash, that's speculating. I'm not talking about somebody who goes in and takes a building and fixes it up, puts improvements into it, and then sells it. There's a lot of difference. We're talking about somebody who just churns it over. And that's why we've, at least in the audience we're going to introduce, there's a review panel to allow those people who go in and do rehabilitation of buildings.
There was a property, an anti-speculation ordinance that the board was considering just this week. It didn't even advance out of the Finance Committee.
It didn't even exist.
Why?
It was a skeleton.
Why is your proposal, does your proposal have a chance politically?
Pragmatically.
Wait a moment. What does that mean?
I don't know. You mean, do I have 6 votes?
That's what I mean.
Right now, I doubt it.
Would you consider putting it on a ballot in November? It's too late for June.
It's too late for June.
Is it something that the voters should have a chance to?
No. I mean, yes and no. I'm tired. One of the reasons I ran for office, I was tired of seeing the voters having to make all the major decisions. That's what you're supposed to elect people for. If they don't make the right decisions, you throw us out.
Well, you voted to put several charter amendments on the June ballot.
Well, I'm voting also, no, through the works. But I wanted to have charter modernization so we don't have to go through that. I think the supervisors should make the decisions, more decisions. I think we should have a stronger board of supervisors and a stronger mayor, not weaker. Every time you go to the voters, you're saying, well, that's why we got in trouble with the port, that's why we got in trouble with the education. It's getting rid of power, it's piecemealing it, so nobody could be responsible for the major decisions. And I'm frankly tired of the old board and some of the philosophies of not making decisions. Let the voter make the decision and wash my hands. We are talking about the salaries of the city, and everybody gets up there and harangues about it. Well, the supervisors didn't pass the salaries, but they passed on the responsibility to other people. And I think I'm tired of that. I think the supervisors should stand up and be counted and not turn everything over to the voters.
You'd like to see a charter that would be very spare and not go into every detail, but leave it to the elected officials?
Right.
But don't we have a charter that's filled with detail because the elected officials were giving away the kitchen sink in the past?
So
Why should we trust you any more than the past?
Well, this current Board of Supervisors, the outgoing one, they put on several years ago Proposition M, which gave huge pensions to the fire and police. And then after they said that was wrong and redid that. And then 2 years ago they put on Proposition D, which set salary standards. Now they say it's wrong. You know, charter amendment is hard to change once you get one on. It's costly and everything else. And I'm not saying that we are any better or any worse, but it would be a lot easier to make the changes if we do make a mistake, and we will.
In connection with the anti-speculation ordinance, I wanted to ask you, where do you stand on proposed rent control?
Any form I've heard of it, I'm against. I think it's the wrong, first of all, rent control is the wrong battle. It pits landlord versus tenant, and that's a wrong battle. Again, as we talked about anti-speculation, the answer to rent control is more housing. If you had, for argument's sake, say we need a rent control bill, we can get into that. It has to allow the landlord incentive to build. If you can put your money in a bank and get, say, 8% and go off to Tahiti, you're smiling. I'll go with you.
It sounds good.
No headaches, and you get 8%. Then if you're going to put that same amount of money into housing and have the headaches of a landlord and insurance and leaky faucets and everything else, you've got to do better than 8%. So you've got to build in the incentive for capitalism. And I have yet to see a rent control bill that does that. and that's a major thing. But if we don't do something about the housing problem, what is going to happen as the rents keep going up and the elderly keep getting driven out? The alternative I'm talking about, the poor people being driven out. What are we going to do with the senior citizens? And so I usually say to someone, are you for rent control? And I say, are you for the alternative? Are you for driving out those people who can't afford the high rents? And I don't think I'm for rent control, and I don't think you're for driving out the senior citizens. And so we must look at the alternative of building housing. And we've got to do that. We've got to address that problem. I don't see the real estate industry, the real estate board, who is so concerned about real estate, addressing that question. And I think they should be. I don't see the unions addressing it, and they must. And I don't see the people at City Hall who have the power to address it, or the Chamber of Commerce to address those issues.
There isn't a lot of empty land, of course, in the little narrow confines of the city. Do you think they should build housing, for example, out at the playland at the beach side?
No.
Well, you just said you should build more housing.
Okay, but there's plenty of land south of Market. There's plenty along 3rd Street.
Let me ask you about that. You think housing should be built where Yerba Buena is supposed to go?
In that area, yeah.
But
it'd be nice.
Not on the Yerba Buena site.
Well, I don't know if Yerba Buena should be built there. They're talking about, in order to build it now, we have to increase the hotel tax from 6 to 8%. If we build the convention center on the piers, see, because we were saying that the waterfront can't be saved, everybody's telling me, and if it's not going to be saved, it's going to be used. And if we build a convention center on the pier, it might be much cheaper, at least I know it's going to be cheaper, and we may not have to increase the hotel tax. Again, if Jarvis Gann passes, we're going to need that hotel tax money for other things. There won't be any money for the Yerba Buena Center. So I don't know if that's the right site. The only reason I hear it's the right site, it's closer to the hotels. And I don't think the distance between there and the hotels, or those hotels, and the distance between those hotels and the waterfront is that far. In fact, it would encourage people to see San Francisco.
Let me drag you back to the ocean for a minute. What do you think should be done with the playland site then?
I have a vision. Actually, it should be a park. There's so precious few ocean spots that come up. When one does come up, I think, we have to decide what's more important, standard of living or quality of life. And to me, the quality of life is very important. An open space park. There's only one exception of what I would like to see personally there.
What kind of park? You mean a Golden Gate Park?
Right, for people to enjoy. I wouldn't mind putting in there, or at least talk about it. In fact, we are going to. Right now, the De Young Museum is overcrowded. And the De Young cannot show everything it has. And they're looking for new space to add in De Young. And I've thrown out the idea, and I'd like to get reaction to it, of putting on that part where Playland used to be, an Asian museum. And since it looks out to Asia, it's on the Pacific coast, and house the Asian collection there in the park, in a new building, and that would give the De Young room enough for the rest of its collection without expanding there. So I've thrown that out, and I'm waiting to get the feedback on that.
You mentioned the possibility of more housing south of Market. You don't mean, or you do mean, the sort of high-rise senior citizen housing that we're seeing, some of which is being built there now? Or
the complex types?
Yeah.
I think San Francisco has enough complexes, mental complexes, without adding physical complexes.
I walked right into that,
I know you did. I couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
What kind of housing do you have in mind? You mean in all, where those 2-, 3-story industrial buildings, many of them empty, stand now?
Right. I would like to see almost like neighborhood types built with shops and everything else, so that it's more than just a place to build houses. It's a place to live. And with those industrial sites, if we can bring in some light industry, then people could walk to work. You see, Levi Strauss did something interesting. They're moving out of their high rise, and they're building a new complex on the other end of the waterfront. It's a low rise, And I think they understood what the trend, that building up is not always the answer.
How would your anti-speculation tax affect someone who is building new housing? Would that person be able to build a house and then keep his profits after? I mean, you build a new house to sell it. You don't build it to live in it.
Okay, you see, but that's not...
How would that be affected by your anti-speculation tax?
It has no effect at all. The speculation is somebody who owns something already and is selling it within a time frame. To build it and sell it...
It wouldn't apply to new construction.
No. You can't do that. In fact, I'd do the opposite. I would do everything I can to encourage new construction in new areas rather than to rebuild the old areas. See, right now, most of the condo conversions and most of the new building is to rip down what we have and make something new there when we have all this other opportunity. and I think we should use it. Of course, I have a couple of dreams of what else I would like to see there. I wouldn't mind seeing that South Market area also ban the automobile.
Well, that's the New Yorker in you talking, I guess.
No, that's the Disneyland in me talking. You see, we have to go to Disneyland or Disney World or amusement parks to have a pleasant place to walk and stroll and transportation. No pollution, not going to be hit by cars. People could ride bicycles, strollers, and babies and everything else. I mean, it's great just to move around in those amusement parks. We have to go to amusement park for a good transportation system.
Let me drag you back to reality for just a...
Disneyland is reality.
I know you only go to reality as a tourist. What are you satisfied with the way the city administration has been handling the parking meter scandal so far?
Yeah. According to the charter, I can't interfere with any of the department, but
you can have an opinion.
The answer is no, Jerry.
Why is that?
I think, first of all, let me just preface this by saying I think the administration of the city by charter is fouled up. We have a mayor and we have a chief administrative officer who's like a city manager. We have a two-headed executive branch. And the chief executive officer, there's no accountability to the voters or the taxpayers. He's appointed for 10 years, and that's it. So I think there's a problem there that there's no ultimate responsibility for certain departments. In this particular case, we've run into that catch-22. We have some people on the streets who are accused of, in lower jobs, accused of taking some money. Then we have a bunch of lieutenants and colonels and captains, and we finally have a general, the general being the CAO. The way I look at it, I don't know all the facts because I'm sitting on the other side of the hall. You don't accuse a lieutenant or a colonel if the privates are on the take. You wait and see if they're guilty. You know. But if you're going to go ahead and clap down because you're afraid there's been mismanagement, the general's at fault. In a war zone, when you have a battle and you lose a battle, because the troops didn't fight properly or whatever it is, you can blame the troops. You don't blame the lieutenants and colonels, you blame the general. You get rid of the general. And I don't have all the facts, so I may be wrong, but to get rid of or suspend Tad Brown, the tax collector, is like getting rid of the colonel. I think that if anybody should have been, and I don't know if anybody should have been, it would have to be the top man who has the ultimate responsibility. Harry Truman, the reason I loved him so much is he said the buck stops here. Well, the nickel stops here.
A buck then is worth a nickel today. You think that Roger Boaz, the chief administrative officer, whoever it is, bears responsibility for malfeasance?
He may have facts I don't know about. If he does, that'll come out. If he doesn't, then I think he took the wrong step.
We have about half a minute. Do you support getting rid of the chief administrative officer's job? I don't mean Roger Boaz.
Oh, yes. I think we need charter modernization, as you hinted on earlier. That means to get rid of it, put more responsibility in the mayor. This is a big city. It's not just 670,000. It's over 1 million people living and working here. We need a powerful, powerful executive officer to make those hard decisions and the responsibility and the removal of that person if the decisions are wrong.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you.
My guest this evening has been Harvey Milk, supervisor from San Francisco's 5th District. Please join us next week when our guest will be Supervisor Ron Pelosi from the 11th District. This is Jerry Burns saying good night.
This has been Viewpoint Harvey Milk, the 29th program in our series designed to help you become more informed on the viewpoints of your community leaders. The opinions expressed on Viewpoint are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the policies of Viacom Cablevision or the opinions of its management or employees. Viewpoint Harvey Milk has been presented in the public interest by Viacom Cablevision of San Francisco.